Good morning. We're back. We had our first video the other day. Here's the second one. Today, I want to talk about seemingly fitting with the dark cloud that is over the day here. It's pouring rain. I'm soaking wet. So, the other day, Dick Cheney died, which the man was in government for longer than I've been alive. 1969. He was a staffer to Nixon and Ford before he started coming up with ways to bomb people all over the world. So Dick Cheney died, and I knew it was going to be the case when it happened, because the people that were... So, obviously, when Charlie Kirk died, he didn't just die. When Charlie Kirk was murdered on camera in front of the world, people were celebrating, obviously, which is disgusting and crazy. And it's weird how many teachers were the ones that were doing it. It makes me wonder if there really were, the ratio was so many educators, or if that's just what we found out about because it's especially abhorrent for the people that are teaching children how to live their lives, to be celebrating murder. But anyways, so Dick Cheney died, and I knew that when it happened, nobody was really going to say anything, nearly to the degree that Charlie Kirk was. And mostly because of just blatant hypocrisy. So the reason that people used for being happy that Charlie Kirk was killed was because of the things that he said, and that they equated to violence, and they led to violence, and they led to death of people, and which is just obviously not true, as that's not the way it works. But, you know, anybody who thinks rationally knows that. But it's interesting that when a figure who was actually directly responsible for death and suffering all over the world for a tremendous amount of time dies, nobody said anything. And ultimately it's because towards the end of his life, he denounced his support for Donald Trump, which, you know, whatever. I don't care who he votes for or who he's in, you know, who he supports. But the fact that a determining factor in whether or not people are celebrating the death of somebody is whether or not they support or don't support a current president is crazy. There's something wrong with that. And just because it's hypocritical doesn't make one side or the other inherently right. That's just not the way it works. And it's not that I want these people to celebrate Dick Cheney's death. In fact, when he did die, despite the fact that he did all the things that he did and he was not a good person, all I could think of is that I hope at some point at the end of his days that he was shown a light to be able to look at how dark his past really was. Because, man, he was the Secretary of Defense for George H.W. Bush. He wasn't in the Clinton administration, but during the Clinton administration, he had written a letter urging for more, you know, what they called nation building in the Middle East, for all the nations they built. He was a main figure in the Project for the New American Century, I think it's called. It was like him, Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, you know, all these old neocon warhawk lunatics that are effectually, you know, they drove foreign policy from the George W. Bush years forward. That's the war on terror, obviously. That was Dick Cheney's like pet project, but it was all, you know, supported by these people in office. And just like to give some perspective on how much darkness this man brought into the world, a lot of different people said, yeah, in the reports from the George W. Bush White House where people considered Dick Cheney more of in charge, at least during the first term. Was there only one term? I don't even remember. And that's neither here nor there. He was in charge of war. That was his project. With how hawkish George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush were, there were instances in both of their times as presidency where they had to each individually tell Dick Cheney, yeah, we're not doing that. That's too much. Because he had a history of wanting to do too much. All the countries that we've decimated over the last 2 centuries, all the countries that we've destabilized in the name of nation building, which whenever the government likes to give a name to something that sounds nice, it's almost definitely going to do the exact opposite, and that's what nation building was. We were nation destroying all over the Middle East, and not just there, Central America, South America, but as far as the deaths are concerned in these large-scale conflicts, it was largely in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, Kuwait and Yemen, Libya. You could pretty much close your eyes and point to that part of the map, and we've done things there that we probably shouldn't have. So I was curious, so I just wanted to, I was looking at some numbers of those days. In just the War on Terror years alone, from 2001 to 2009, if you could zoom out on the globe, kind of like in SimCity or Roller Coaster Tycoon, where you could you see all the people walking around and living their life, and you could pluck one up and you can look at statistics. Say there were roughly, and this depends on the estimates that you're looking at, it's either 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,200. From 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 1,200 deaths globally from the years 2001 to 2009 could be attributed to the wars that Dick Cheney was pushing. 1 in 1,000. That is crazy. 0.1% of the people that died on the entire planet, for almost a decade, can be attributed to Dick Cheney. So if there were 1,000 people walking around in SimCity and you happen to pick one up, there's a chance that he would die because of Dick Cheney. You have, and then we look at random statistics to look at comparisons. You have a better chance of finding somebody who's been in a hot air balloon. You have about the same chance of looking down in the very first clover patch that you see and finding a 4-leaf clover. That's the level of destruction and just doom that this person brought onto the earth. And where were people? No, it's already gone. It's not even in the news cycle anymore. People don't care. And it's wild because it just shows the blatant hypocrisy of the whole thing. We got Charlie Kirk was assassinated, which is obviously much more immense than somebody dying in their old age. But it's somebody that was a huge part of the government for their entire life. A lot of the people that are even alive, when you do degrees of separation, between me and Harrison Ford, I know this person who knows this person, and eventually you get to people that are connected in the degrees of separation between pretty much anybody in my generation or many generations, and somebody that has died because of Dick Cheney's policies is 1 or 2. Everybody knows somebody that went into the military and died because of the wars that he pushed for, based on lies, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which were blatant lies. It wasn't even I was wrong. He knew they were wrong. He knew that they were not there. And the same thing with trying to... the time that we spent in Afghanistan, there were so many of these conflicts. not just didn't need to happen, it just outright should not have happened. So many people died. What happened to Iraq after we went and did what we did? Something like, even after we left, years after we left, it was something like 1 million people died because of just the destabilization of that country, just the power vacuum that we created and all the conflicts within that happened after. And that's not even included in the, in that 1 to 1,000 ratio ballpark. It's, you can't calculate something like that. Over that period of time, like, it's, and even the American casualties were relatively low, but hundreds of thousands to probably well over 1 million throughout his career and the wars that he pushed for. Innocent civilians in these countries died, because that's mostly who end up getting affected and end up getting killed. No matter what they like to report. It's obviously the case. And it's just, it's crazy to see this just get like swept under, like, oh, Dick Cheney's gone. And not just like, hey, let's take a look at the past and all the decisions that he made. And with the whole thing with Charlie Kirk was like, his words are violence and he's hurting people and he's a Nazi and he's doing all these terrible things and all these people are suffering because of it. Like, it's obviously not true, but it's also, they don't care, because objectively the things that Dick Cheney did caused pain and suffering. The man greenlit actual torture in Guantanamo. Like, he called waterboarding, oh, I wish I could remember the phrase, but he talked about waterboarding like, oh, well, obviously we're gonna do that. This man, his entire history was violence and death and destruction and destabilization and literal suffering and torture and imprisonment. The Patriot Act is in part because of him. The surveillance state is because of him. All of the things that have degraded America in the most aggressive and violent way are because of Dick Cheney. And not a word, not a peep. People don't care. Because it's just not, it's not the hot thing. And it just shows the hypocrisy of the whole thing. To clamor about the dangers of the words of Charlie Kirk and then stay silent over the actual demon that was Dick Cheney. It's crazy. And that's what we're dealing with. It's not rationality. It's not objective thinking, and it's not consistent. It's just people ruled by their emotions and by what other people say. But yeah, that's it. Nobody wants to hear me rant about that, so I'm doing it here. So that while it's pouring rain out, my coworkers don't have to listen to me do that too. But yeah, that's where we're at. I'll cut it off here. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.